Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom.
Yeah, but one of my favorite examples is Adobe. Again, an old line technology company, and they made these amazing CD-ROM based products for marketers and creatives. And they were just incredibly successful. People were very happy with them. There was nothing challenging them in the marketplace. They had like 95% market share. It's just nobody was leaving. And yet they said, there is this customer that's in the cloud who would really benefit from a lower price point than thousands of dollars. They could pay as little as $10 a month to use some of our products, like just use a version of Photoshop, for example. And they also realized that the cloud was coming in that they could move from 18 to 24 month cycles for product development to instantaneously, because you could push the latest updates out through the cloud.
Yeah, of course.
No, this was 2010. Nobody was moving to the cloud at that point. It was untested territory. And their customers were 100% happy with them. Their employees were used to doing things in a certain way. And if you went to a cloud, it was going to be highly disruptive. And as a publicly traded company, when they looked at the financials of doing this, they knew they would lose money for 8 straight quarters.
Wow.
A publicly traded company, right? And if your stock price goes down too far, you're a takeover target. So they looked at all those things and said, look at these customers. They could benefit so much from our product, but they don't really exist. They don't even know that this is a possibility.
Yeah.
So they did this research, they did this survey, they did a test actually in Australia, and they found that, yeah, there was a tremendous appetite for it. So they launched it. And the customers rebelled. 50,000 of them signed a petition saying, we want to go back. The employees, I would get phone calls for them during this time period, and they were like, you would not believe what's happening at Adobe. It's crazy. If we pull this off, it would be amazing, but it's crazy and insane right now. And the stock market was like, what are you guys doing? So when they launched the first quarter, they launched it a year, and then they finally pulled the strings on this completely a year after they launched it. And you could see their profits just plummeting in that first quarter. And when they performed the results, they said, we are so excited about our results. It's such a great pilot that we've had. The launch has gone fantastic. Look, the number of customers, and we've lost exactly the amount of money we predicted. Isn't this wonderful? And the stock price took off because they had prepared everybody for this change. And so even though they lost money, they were able to communicate, this is who our new customer is, and this is how we want to go out doing it. I admire the wisdom of that leadership team to believe and see the patterns, I think, that people couldn't see, to identify that these are the actions, and to make really great decisions along the way. To just beautiful. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it was beautifully executed from step to step. And one of the biggest ones is they made that big gulp decision. They took that big gulp. They literally looked around each other in the room like, are we going to do this? And they all nodded, yes, we're going to do this. We are prepared. It's going to be hard, but we have done everything we can to know that regardless of whatever the outcome is, we're going to be okay.
It's a really important issue. And I used to reflect when I was promoted to general, I'd heard of these people called generals, all my career. I wondered what they did. And what I reflected was there's lots of people who are very, very capable below them who can solve let's call them the small and medium problems. The job of the general was to go and stand next to the biggest challenge and work out how to bring that experience and knowledge to fix it. And so remembering, what it is you bring, and then that's part of that is understanding your leadership evolves as you change levels. If you're down on a mine site running a crusher or running the vehicle fleet, that's your job to focus in that. But as you get more senior, you have to start to understand the other aspects of a business, including costs and contractors and safety and all those other things. So as you evolve, it grows. And what we've got to do as a leader as we grow, we've got to really work on that. We've got to grow our wisdom. We've got to grow our experience so that when we do get to those levels, we are able to, use language that I'm used to, sense the battlefield. That little noise over there, that village, that provincial leader who's, is really upset. The attacks on the fuel vehicles that are going down the main highway that may risk our, ability to give the population the fuel they need. The ability of, one of the nations might be, there might be political signals that they're thinking of pulling out back home, and if there's further casualties, it's that complexity and being able to listen to that sort of orchestra, pick out that odd note that is discordant, and then understand what it means to bring that, into the leadership conversation. So I think wisdom is the accumulation of that art, that leadership art and experience that I know I know the business, I know the sector, I know the political language and landscape of that business, and then, be able to, as you said before, interpret that in a way that others can consume. And there's a great tool that I learned in, as a military thing. We try and issue direction, again, particularly at that senior level. It's no good just telling people to jump 3 feet. It's the idea of describing something with a purpose. The purpose of this thing that we're doing is this. The end state I want to achieve is this.
Yeah.
And giving them the freedom to maneuver. Now, we might choose to describe method, so, purpose, method, and end state, but we only give method insofar as it might be to pass on our experience. And, to use a simple example from my old world, I need you to advance from here to here in order to, find a security position that will cover the infiltration route, down this particular prominent valley. And once you're there, you need to establish security for another organisation to move. And now I think it will be slow and difficult here, and you'll be able to move here and do this. And so you've passed on your experience, but you've given them a vision. And so if something changes, I always had the phrase, if you're sitting at a task and the task changes, what would my boss want me to do if she or he were here? And if they can answer that without, jumping on a radio or disrupting, then you've kind of done your job. So the wisdom piece is all of that, listening to that, that orchestra of noise that we're all experiencing, finding out the important parts of that, and being ready to do something. I'll give you a good example. I was not long left the military and arrived at Boral, big, great old Australian construction material company, 70 years old, founded by some veterans out of World War II. And I could start to hear the language of the government about this thing that became the COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah. And I went to the CEO and I said, this thing that they're talking about is going to come here, and it's going to be a pandemic, and we need to do some preparation. And they're good guys. And he said, look, we got some travel restrictions, Gus. We won't let people go to China. I think we'll be okay. And I said, no, I speak government. And you just have certain experience that you knew what they were trying to tell us without being ready. We had a great CIO who had he's an American guy who had some experience working in the US State Department. And between us, we said, you know what? There's a whole lot of things we can do to get ready before that. And that just comes from that ability to, in that case, speak government, understand the potential of what was coming, and then, mobilize a pretty good business to do something about it. So that's what senior leaders are expected to do.
One of the big things is when you're in a professional or any sort of sporting team, it's really clear what you're working towards. Like you're working towards a World Cup, or you're working towards a grand final, and your season is really defined. And so you're actually working within something that's obvious, and that who your competitors are. They've all got names, and they all turn up and they're in the draw. And like there's no one coming out of nowhere that oh my God, I didn't even know that team existed, right? Whereas you go into business or politics or charity or anything like that, where you're outside that really structured environment, all these things can happen. You can have disruptors, you can have you don't really know when your grand final is. You don't really know when the big pressure games are coming. You might be able to define some of them, because you might know that at the end of the financial year, things get a bit hairy. And when you're in reporting season, things get a bit hairy. But like there's not a grand final or a draw, or there's not that structure in business. And so when you step out of sport, you actually have to learn how to operate in a bit more of a chaotic environment, because it's really difficult then to define success, because in a sports team, you have you start the year and you know that on the 15th of August, you'll know whether you've been successful or not, because you will have won the grand final or not. And if you haven't even made finals, then you'll know before. And business is a little bit different. Yeah, there's the financial reporting, but not every business is defined wholly and solely by its financial goals. There's a number of other goals. And I think the thing that I have tried to bring into business is to say, well, how are we defining success? And how are we going to celebrate our success, right? Because sometimes we do forget to celebrate, whereas teams that I've been in have been very good at celebrating our end of season. And, you know, I've been in teams where we haven't won. We've been appalling, and we've had to go away through in the middle of the season and redefine what success looks like. And that's much easier to do in a team, because you have a measurement every week. You have a game every week to see how you're going. And, you know, when you get into the business world, it's far more fluid about, well, when are we going to measure success? We're going to do it every week? Are we going to do it every month or 6 months or quarterly? How's it going to be? And what are we looking at other than the financial figures to define how we are successful? Because if you're trying to build a successful culture, it's more than just the money. It's a number of other things, or, you know, what your product looks like, or, you know, there's so many different things to take into account. But I think when you're leading in a field that's not sport, being able to define where your success markers are, what defines your success, how you're going to measure it, and how you're going to celebrate it is really important. Once you hit your game moment, there's an hour and a half of sort of chaos. You can do all your prep and you know what your game plan is, but the surprises come with the opposition and what they do to you, because they might have planned something different, right? So, but a good team who's been really thorough in its preparation and really understands its values and its behaviours and keeping people accountable, I think the more you do, you get that right off the field or off the court. When you do get into that chaotic moment, how you react is how you've prepared, right? And this is what I often say to people, is that your reactions under pressure are what you practice day in, day out when you're not under pressure. So if you, this is a very straightforward example from my sport. If you finish a drill when someone drops the ball, you're practicing dropping the ball at the end of the drill.
Yeah.
If you're not allowed to step in netball, right? So if you finish a drill and you walk over and you've got the ball in your hand and you're walking with the ball, you're practicing breaking the rules, breaking of the sport, right? So I used to hammer it into my teams, and I still do it with my under 13s girls that I coach, is that we don't practice bad habits, because what you allow yourself to slip into in training, the moment you're under pressure, that's exactly what you will slip into in a game. If you make yourself complete the drill properly, don't allow yourself to step or to throw a bad pass or to drop the ball or whatever the mistake is in training, then that won't happen in a game. And so what you produce under pressure is what you have practiced all year long. So, you know, there are moments of chaos, but business is more chaotic than sport. But I think the baseline is true, that if every day you walk into the office and you practice good habits, when the shit hits the fan, or when something blows up, or when there's something chaotic happens in your business, you'll revert to what you've done day after day. And if you have got into the habit of practicing good habits, having good corporate health through the times when things aren't so chaotic, that's you will slip into good habits under pressure.
So you made an interesting comment, right, about how much athletes often fail, and people don't, you know, and that is the great story, you know, the Jordan stories, tried to put 100 perfect shots up, but it took him hours to do it, and Babe Ruth struck out more times than he actually hit a home run, and all of these sorts of things. But, you know, the people that are keeping tally of that are usually the athlete rather than, you know, the public. But there's a really interesting model. One of the things that I do a lot of is use models as a way of understanding situations. And if we think about time in 3 dimensions, you know, we have the past, and I want to unpack the model a little bit and then get your insights into something. We have the present, and I've only just kind of thought about this in response to what you said, and then of course we have the future.
Yeah.
And the past is hindsight. So we look backwards and think about what happened. The present is insight, and the future is foresight.
Mm-hmm.
And if I look at the common human condition that we come across, if we look at average, right? A lot of people visit the past, with regret or blame. Why did that happen? They look to the future with anxiety often and fear. And, they spend 10 to 20% of their time in this zone and 10 to 20% of their time in this zone. And they might only spend about 60% of their time in the present doing things, right? I think athletes process these time zones differently. And I'd be really interested in your, the conversation about, so, you don't win a match or you don't play as well as you did. What do you go back to the past to process? And I suspect it's not this stuff. And how long do you spend there and what do you do with it and how do you bring it into the present? I know I'm springing this on you without notice, but I suspect elite athletes deal with this differently.
Yeah, we do. And I think you're absolutely right. I think our reflection on the past is a big part of where we are in the present.
Mm-hmm.
I think what we don't do a lot of is we don't want to spend too much time in that future, because spending time in the future means that you're looking at the outcome, not the actual process to get you there. So for me personally, and I'll use an example, and this is, I hold a world record for the fastest red card in World Cup history. Now, I got a straight red card in 99 at the age of 16, and this will explain why I've said this, and I got sent off after a minute and a half. Now, it was an irrational challenge. There was no malice in it, and I got a straight red card. But from what happened in my build up to that game, I was thinking far too much of the outcome rather than what processes I need to do for us to get a result and for me to perform well. So I let the occasion get hold of me. I let the emotion get hold of me. And rather than focusing on having a good first touch, making sure that I'm communicating with my teammates, I was thinking of the headlines. I was thinking that I wanted to score the winning goal. I was thinking that we were going to beat China, who were the eventual finalists. They came runners up to USA. And the emotional side of that got the better of me because I stopped focusing on what the process was. So the past, our past hugely influences our present, but we take away a fair bit of that anxiety and fear about what the future holds.
Sure. And what is it? So that's interesting. If I kind of summarize this, you're changing this balance that the average might have. We spend about 20% of the time in the future. What you're really saying is the longer you spend focusing on the outcome, the less you spend in process executing.
I think so. Look, there's also, there's different levels of goal setting and the way to focus on, and that's still an outcome focus. But and we know this in goal setting, then we always work our way back.
Yeah.
So there's the goal, and then okay, what's the process? And and our day in day out process. It's not the perfection of repetition. It's that just the repetition of improvement, and because perfection is unrealistic in anything, but it's back to that simple thing: control the controllables.
Yeah, great.
So I had a very good coach say once, we can't control the referee, we can't control the conditions, you can't control what the opposition are going to do, whether they're going to kick you, whether they're going to play a lot better than you. But and as I said before, what we can control ourselves is our attitude, our application, and our effort. Now that also, I think, hits home when you're having a stinker of a game, when you've got to touch like a baby elephant and you're losing possession or you're not helping your teammates. But what can I control? Right, I can control my positive attitude. I can control my effort, so the amount that I actually stay engaged in the game, and I can control I forgot the attitude, effort, and application. So how do I apply myself? So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my first touch is a better first touch, and then that I keep possession this time. And you use it in smaller increments. So you stay in the present, right? What can I do right now or in the very near future without looking too far ahead? I think it's the foresight. I think the anxiety and fear of the foresight is looking too far into the future and putting too much expectation on what that outcome is and not really focusing on what's happening right here and now.
Part of the start point for us would be to help define some terms. And so, so I think one of the things that certainly military leaders, or at least leaders in my previous profession, special operations, did was we looked at performance a very specific way, and we looked at leadership a very specific way. And so let me start with performance. And the idea is that we look at performance in a much more holistic manner than most people. What do I mean by that? Well, let's just take this concept of peak performance. There's a lot of talk. There has been always a lot of talk around peak performance, and everybody wants to strive and maintain and achieve peak performance. They want to peak here, peak there, and peak everywhere. And in fact, people used to tell me, "You Navy SEALs are the ultimate peak performers." But I always disagreed with that statement. And there's a reason. It's because peak, by definition, is an apex. And there's only one place you can go from an apex, and that's downward, right? And the other thing about peak is that peak often has to be planned for and scheduled and prepared for. The professional football player plans and schedules his or her entire week to peak for game day, right? We don't get to do that. Navy SEALs don't get to do that. Regular people don't get to do that, and whether you're in personal life or professional life. And I used to say we're not peak performers, we are optimal performers. Optimal performance is something a little bit different. Optimal performance means that I'm going to do the very best in the moment, whatever the best looks like in that moment. Okay. So sometimes our best in the moment could look like peak, and everything's flowing and clicking and it's flow states and everything's cool and groovy. But sometimes our best in the moment could be, I am just head down, gutting it out, going step by step, because that's all I have right now. And that is still performing optimally. And so optimal performance allows us two very important things. First of all, it allows us to celebrate those times when we are not at peak, okay? Because we can't be peak all the time. And I can't tell you how many missions, and I went on hundreds of combat missions overseas. I can't tell you how many missions we came back from, and we'd be like, man, that was ugly. But we did the job. We did what we had to do. So it allows you to celebrate those times when you're not at peak. And then the second thing it allows you to, which is probably a little bit more important and kind of will segue into the leadership portion, is that it allows us to do what I call responsible energy management. In other words, I don't need to be peak when I'm driving to the grocery store. Okay, I can be at some other energy level. And a myth I'll bust about Navy SEALs just right off the bat, because there's a lot of TV and movies about them, is you might see a group of SEALs on TV or movies, and they're getting ready to go on a mission, and right before they go, they're all huddling up and they're hoo-yawing and they're high-fiving like some sports team getting ready to take the field. Well, I'll tell you, that never happens, ever. In fact, most of the time we'd be in our helicopters flying into combat, and the guys around me would be asleep. They'd be napping. And there's a reason behind that. It's because we don't know what's coming. We don't know how long we're going to be out there. We don't know what's going to be required energetically. We're not going to waste an ounce of our energy doing things we don't need to do. And so optimal performance allows us to think of performance as this umbrella underneath which peak lives, and gutting it out lives, and even recovery lives, right? So all of that goes into the performance picture. So that's the first thing. We have to really think about and define performance more holistically. And then that also seeds into how we start to look at leadership. Attributes are what tell us if a human being has what it takes to do the job, not knows how to do the job, but what it takes to do the job. So there's a distinct difference between skills and attributes. And this is what I'm talking about in terms of teaming and building teams. If you build a team based solely on skills, then the best this, best that, you're likely going to have a team that turns toxic, because you're not focusing on the interaction. Those interactions are based on qualities that we bring to the equation, bring to the environment. The other thing that attributes allows for us to do is see and understand how and why we perform the way we do in uncertainty, challenge, and stress, when things aren't going the way we planned. And so, quick distinction between the two. Skills are learned. They're not inherent to our nature. None of us are born with the ability to ride a bike or throw a ball, okay, or drive a car. Skills, we're trained to do those things. We're taught to do those things. Skills direct our behavior and known in specific circumstances. Here's how and when to throw a ball or drive a car. And then finally, skills are very visible. They're very easy to see, which means they're very easy to measure, test, and assess. You can put scores around skills or statistics around skills. You could put skills on resumes, which is why we get seduced by skills often when we're hiring or trying to pick for teams. The problem with skills is they don't tell us how we're going to show up in stress, challenge, and uncertainty, because in an unknown environment, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to apply a known skill. This is when we lean on attributes. Attributes, on the other hand, are inherent to our nature. In other words, all of us are born with levels of patience or adaptability or situational awareness, right? Now, you can certainly develop these things over time and experience, but you can see levels of this stuff in very small children. Any of us who have kids or have experienced kids will agree with me when I say there are 1.5-year-olds who are patient and there are 1.5-year-olds who are impatient, right? So there's a nature-nurture element to attributes. Attributes don't direct our behavior. Attributes inform our behavior. They tell us how we're going to show up in an environment. So my son's levels of resilience and perseverance informed the way he showed up when he was learning the skill of riding a bike, and he was falling off a dozen times doing so. And then finally, because they're difficult to see, they're very difficult to measure and test and assess. How do you measure someone's levels of adaptability or patience, right? But the idea is these attributes, if we're ignoring or if we're not paying attention to attributes in our performance picture, we're missing a huge part, if not the most important part of high-performing teams. And what I had to do in the SEALs was understand and try to articulate what were those things we were looking for that had nothing to do with scuba diving, shooting, or skydiving, right? And I'll give you a real quick example which will drive this home. And you and I may have talked about this in one of our previous conversations, but there's a story that goes back before even I was a SEAL, that a kid showed up to Navy SEAL training, and he went to the instructors and says, I want to be a Navy SEAL. And the instructor says, okay, you have to do a swim test. And the kid says, okay, fine. So they take him out to the pool. It's a pretty easy test. It's 25 meters to one end, 25 meters back to the other end. Kid gets all ready to go. He jumps in the pool. He immediately sinks to the bottom of the pool. And as soon as he's at the bottom of the pool, he starts walking across the bottom of the pool to one end, and then he walks across the bottom of the pool back to the other end. He comes up, he's gasping for air, nearly drowning. The instructor looks at him and says, what the heck are you doing? And the kid, who's still trying to catch his breath, I'm sorry, instructor, I don't know how to swim. At that point, the instructor pauses and looks at the kid and says, that's okay, we can teach you how to swim. And so the idea is, the question is, why did the instructor say that? The instructor said that because he knew if this kid had the attributes to show up to Navy SEAL training, not knowing how to swim, he had everything inside of him to be a Navy SEAL. Teaching him the skill of swimming was going to be the easy part, right? And so this is what attributes are. And in doing this, I kind of recognized them, used them in the training, but then also wrote the book about them. And that's the work we do now. We help people and organizations understand what, in fact, the attributes they are looking for are, and help them assess and select for those. First of all, attributes can be developed. So in other words, if you're low on an attribute, you can develop it. The thing is, you can't develop it the same way you can a skill, okay? Because you can't teach, and here's actually a quick way for people to understand or determine whether or not they're dealing with a skill or an attribute. It's ask a very simple question. Can I teach it, or can it be taught? If the answer is yes, it's probably a skill. If the answer is no, it's probably an attribute, right? So if you said, Rich, I want to learn how to shoot a pistol and hit a bullseye, I could take you to the range and teach you how to do that within a couple hours. That's a skill. Or you said, Rich, I want to learn how to be more patient. I can't teach you how to do that, right? And so attributes can, if you're low on an attribute, you can definitely develop it. However, there's 3 criteria, okay, that have to be met. First is you have to know you're low on it, okay? Yeah. Second is you have to have a reason or motivation or desire to develop it. What do I mean by that? It's because just because you're low on an attribute doesn't mean you have to develop it. In other words, being low on that might be exactly what you need for your specific niche. I always kind of say the stand-up comic with too much empathy is going to be a lousy stand-up comic, okay? So you have to understand that developing this will, in fact, help you in your niche. So assuming, number 1, yes, I know I'm low. Number 2, okay, developing this will, in fact, help me. Number 3 is the most important part. You have to go find environments inside of which you tease and test that attribute. So if you want to develop your patience, go find environments that test and tease your patience, whatever that looks like for you. It could be, I'm going to deliberately drive in traffic. I'm going to pick the longest line in the grocery store to stand in, or I always say have kids. Having kids will develop patience, right? But whatever that is, you can do that for any attribute. But the key is, just because you're low on one doesn't necessarily mean you need to develop it. Now, that's part 1. Part 2 is, if you have someone in a role that's underperforming, you may find that person is underperforming because they're deficient in maybe 1 or 2 attributes, and that person may find it to be a valuable project to develop those attributes. That certainly can be done. But you also may find that person's attribute list is just not aligned, right? I had this happen to me. I was in charge of about many people, but I had a department where it was a supply department, and we had 2 sections, right? One section dealt with future acquisition and research. The other one dealt with administrative logging and things like that, log keeping. I had a person in the future acquisition side who was grossly underperforming, and there was morale problems, and it was just bad. I brought this person in, and we had a quick conversation, and I had already done this work, so I knew. So within 10 minutes, I knew immediately that this person's attribute list, their unique set, was completely misaligned for the role they're in. But it was perfectly aligned for this other role, this administrative role. So all I did was move this person over, performance skyrocketed, right? So it's not necessarily about having to develop. It's also not necessarily about having to fire people. You may just have to shift seats on the bus, and you find performance skyrocketing.
I don't hear it talked about very much, but it's to get the people around you to feel the ownership of the culture. Now, I will say in large corporations, the people who rise to the top have a characteristic such that their ambition and they're ambitious and their goal is to become the new CEO. That's a different kind of ambition than building a company where a lot of people feel ownership of it. So I don't often hear larger companies talking about the general people around them feeling like they have ownership of the company. Sometimes they conflate ownership of the culture with ownership of stock or control.
Yeah.
So these are really difficult issues. And frankly, when it comes to difficult issues, most people, not all, but most people would rather focus on things which is easier to understand, which is the actual stock or ownership or their power position within the company.
Yeah.
And most of the forces on CEOs has to do with short-term market pressure. Very damaging. And I've only known a few who can actually overcome that. Steve being one of them. It's actually pretty remarkable. He had the ability to ignore the short-term pressure and think about the long term. So one way I've had of expressing it is, if you ask leaders, what are three things that you have to do? Like it's called three values. You wouldn't necessarily call them a value.
Yes.
But a company does have to make money.
Yes.
A company should make a good product, and the company needs good people. So those are three things you'd say, okay, you need to have those. So then the question is, which is the most important? So if you were to ask people which is the most important, then you'd probably hear either they're all equal, or the product's the most important, or people's most important. So all right, so those are the words. What actually drives their decision?
Yeah.
The profit is the tangible. It absolutely drives the decisions. The second is the product. Third is the people. So what you end up with is an inversion of the values. And that's the thing you're talking about in terms of tangible versus intangible, is that the intangible is in fact the thing you have to worry about for the future, but its value gets inverted because of the things they can measure.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest problem that a lot of companies have. Even in the computer industry, companies were attached to their current model, which was short term. I mean, for instance, no workstation company has survived till today because they were very successful and they were attached to that model. But the model was based upon a rate of change that their engineers knew about, but the leaders didn't. And at the time, I thought, this is just bizarre. How could I not know this? It's not like they're off in some other unrelated industry and this thing is going to catch up with everybody at some point. It's like they're in the business and they couldn't do it. So this is a mystery that I had to think about for quite a few years. This is off to the side. Well, meanwhile, we're making decisions based upon the fact that it is going to change. And when Steve Jobs bought us, he understood it intuitively. It's going to change. Now, that rate of change is now affecting pretty much everybody.
Yeah.
Which means that every industry is going through the same sort of thing. So how do you think about the change? Because almost every place you are in, you're going to see that. And people aren't typically equipped to think of that kind of change. So as an example, the amount of compute power that's on either your smartphone or your computer will increase by a factor between 40 and 100 in the next 10 years. So that can't help but alter a lot of things that are going on. And AI is already interesting and demonstrable as having some value across a number of industries, although highly unpredictable. But the amount of aggregate computing in the world in the next 10 years will increase by a factor of 1 million. So how do you think about this when you run your companies? And when you think about how you prepare your people or how you have them help prepare you, because usually there are people in the company who actually know more about it than you do. That's an asset, as we were saying. So you want that, and you want the people in there who actually really get that and make it an exciting part of the growth of business. And when they do that, they then feel like they have some ownership in the outcome. So I'm kind of trying to tie the different pieces together, say that they're all related.
Yeah.
And that's the creativity. It's responding to the change, which will create not just new opportunities, but allow you to respond to some rather difficult things that are coming. We have to start by saying, I don't know what's going to happen in 4 or 5, and certainly in 10 years. I really don't know. So if I don't know, what do I do? Well, I have to do something. So I'm going to make a decision, but what's your correcting mechanism, or what's your truth finding mechanism? And different groups have pretty good ones. Most of them are actually pretty bad at it because the leader thinks their job is to know the answer. It's not. It's like, get over it. But it's really hard because in mentally, they think their job is they've earned the way to be on top and to make the decisions.
Yeah.
So for me, there are 2 examples. One was within Pixar for the films. Every few months, we have a screening of each film, and then we have a meeting which is run in a certain way. We call it the brain trust meeting. It's not actually a set group of people. It's a way of running a meeting which acknowledges the vulnerability of the director of the film. It acknowledges the fact that there are problems. And we typically don't even use the terminology of failure.
Right.
So if something doesn't work, then, okay, it didn't work. So it isn't like we always avoid the word failure, because every once in a while, there actually is a real failure of some sort with software or management failure or something like that. But for normal working where you're trying stuff and you know that it's not going to work, we don't use the terminology of failure, because the expectation is we're all trying to fix the problem. We're all trying to help each other. And it's a difficult process. So you don't want to put on a psychic load that they are a failure. Rather, they are doing what they're supposed to do, which is to solve the problem. So that's a mechanism that we use. It's been very effective. Another one, which is when I tell people this, they're surprised. Pixar was a public company for 10 years. Steve was the chairman of the board of directors. Steve had the controlling interest of the company, so he picked the board of directors. Okay. During those 10 years, Steve fired 2 members of the board of directors. The reason he fired them was because they never disagreed. Wow. He said if they never disagree, then they aren't providing any value to the company.
Interesting.
So that's in other words, Steve wanted somebody who would disagree with him because that was his self-correcting mechanism.
Interesting.
So now we go to Apple and the iPhone. There's a book. It's actually a great book, except for 2 things in the book where the person thought it was a failure on Steve's part, and he missed the important thing. And it had to do with the iPhone, because when Steve acknowledged, or he's the one that's brought it up, he said there's an end to the growth of the workstation. We need something else. He wanted to come out with an iPad as the next product. His executives didn't agree, and they had these disagreements. And in the end, they convinced him to go with the phone instead. So disagreement, Steve yields. Now, everybody's still there through the whole thing. It's just kind of what they do. And it turns out to have been the best decision. Then as the phone was coming out, there was another disagreement. Executives thought that the apps should be open, and Steve thought they should be controlled by Apple. And again, they had a debate, and this time Steve, who's the final word on this, Steve actually prevailed and had it so it was a closed system. But he realized within 4 months that it was a mistake, and they switched over. And then 1 year after the first phone came out, they opened up the App Store. Again, everybody was there the whole time. Nobody got fired. It was just the error correcting mechanism that was in place. And the reason I was critical of the book is the book said that showed a weakness on Steve's part, when in fact what it showed was the strength on Steve's part, because he had people there who would disagree with him. And he valued the fact that he had this debating and sometimes intense debates. Just like within Pixar, the debates over a film were really intense. They weren't personal. They were about how you fix the problem. And they were passionate. Let's say they were intense debates. And if you didn't know these people, you would think they were arguing. But they weren't, because it was focused on the problem. That notion of the error correcting mechanism is really important. It's very subtle. My guess is that most CEOs think they've got a good error correction mechanism. And I would argue that most of them don't.
In 20 to 30 years' time, we will think of the healthcare system that we have today as extremely primitive and error prone and ineffective, right? Comparative to what is coming. And so ultimately, if you start thinking about how healthcare transform with AI, it's going to transform a bunch of areas. It's going to make diagnostics much, much more effective and efficient. At the same time, it's going to be much more systemic approach to your individual health, tailored around your genome, tailored around your individual blood work, tailored to real-time data that we are getting from the technology, things you're wearing, even computers you might ingest and things like this. And if you start thinking about, like in the future, your smart glasses or your AI in the cloud, your AI is going to tell you when you need to go to the doctor before you feel sick, right? Yeah. And so suddenly, you've got this radical approach to health maintenance and proactive health support using artificial intelligence that's tailored to you individually, that doesn't work as a mass market approach in the way medicine and big pharma work today. But to get there, we have to completely dismantle the way the healthcare system is set up in developed nations, right? We have to go to a digital twin model. We have to get all of this data, figure out how to care for that data, securely, all of those issues. But coming through that, you then have a situation where you might be able to live to 130 or 150 years with longevity treatments. You'll live much healthier, longer lives, so we call that health span, all possible because of the injection of artificial intelligence in the diagnostics, gene therapy, targeted personalized medicine, all of these technologies that are emerging right now. But you can't really, there's no real analogy to the old healthcare system, except that, okay, we're diagnosing you and we're giving you an intervention. That's about the only sort of relationship it has to the system of old. But trying to get doctors and healthcare providers and so forth to think differently about that is really difficult, because they're stuck in a system, that they've got economic incentives to keep that system going, right? So yeah, in terms of AI as the existential threat, yes. It certainly has the potential to be misused, as any technology does. But at the same time, the problems it will solve for mankind, the collaborative intelligence approach, what we as a species can do with AI and the potential it brings us for growth is just, and also fixing a lot of the problems we have on the planet. The key problem with AI is an economic one rather than sort of a philosophical or policy one, because AI, if it is truly as effective as we think it will be, will upend the labor market. It'll destroy the concept we have of work. And that, you hear all of these entrepreneurs, Sam Altman, Elon, Bill Gates, Zuckerberg, et cetera, all talking about universal basic income now, getting us ready for the fact that AI is going to produce so much wealth, we'll be able to pay you a universal basic income so you can continue to consume, right? And when you think about it, it seems like if you step back from that problem, people are like, well, that's pretty cool. If I could get paid not to work, I'd love that. But at the same time, you have how ridiculous is it that the economic system is paying us to keep that economic system going with consumption, right? That's where AI falls in. For 60 years or 70 years, we've been talking about robotics and AI as labor-saving devices. You remember the Jetsons cartoon with Rosie the robot, she'd clean the home, she'd cook the meals, she'd, help the kids with their homework and things like that. But it was designed as a labor-saving device. So for all of those years, we've been talking about automation as coming in and getting rid of the jobs that humans don't like to do. But inadvertently, we've designed a technology that can replace humans in the workforce across both blue collar and white collar jobs, across every industry simultaneously. So, the speed of disruption of AI is going to be unlike anything else that we've seen technologically. But the more AI we put into the system, the less important humans are in the economy, which produces massive issues for inequality and things like that, because wealth distribution today only occurs through us working, right? So ultimately that's a problem. Ultimately, AI, the more AI we put in the system, the less effective capitalism becomes as an organizing principle for the way we run society. And that's an even bigger existential threat for many people today, because it undermines their political and economic beliefs, right? There is no such thing as borders. There is no such thing as countries, that we all need to work together as a family. And with almost zero exceptions that I can think of right now, they are astronauts who have had the overview effect, looking at the Earth from space. Right. Because when you are in orbit, and you look down on the planet, it's very clear that we are one species, we are one family, and that the divisions that we create, the divisions based on which patch of ground we were born on, or which color skin we have, or what type of economic condition we have, are abstractions. They're not real. It's not really meaningful in terms of the long-term destination of humanity. Now, I know this is a very philosophical conversation, Simon, but the reality is, artificial intelligence is going to make us grapple with this, and I'll tell you one of the main reasons why. We already have for ChatGPT AI models, for example, for O3 and O4, what we're calling metacognition, a form of compressed intelligence that is competitive with human thinking. But very soon, as people like Eric Schmidt will say, that the arrival of non-human intelligence is a really big deal. Why? Because if you have an AI that has impeccable logic and has looked at all of this and can reason with you and say, burning fossil fuels is not a good idea under any circumstances. It kills 15 million people a year. It's produced climate change. None of that is worth the profits that the fossil fuel industry has generated over the last century. You need to get off this train as quickly as possible, and this is the way you make that transition. We're suddenly going to have to negotiate with another alpha intelligence on the planet. Right. And that is something that we're not yet intellectually prepared to do, but I think AI is going to be so consistently better at coming up with solutions and applying logic to these situations that will be hard to argue against. You'll have a period of time, of course, where the old incumbents will try to ban artificial intelligence because of the challenges to that. And then we'll realize, well, actually, the only way through this is to sort of change our operating model, change our organizing principles. So every year, the medical fraternity releases 500,000 medical journals. There's not a single doctor on the planet that could read all that information and absorb it. An AI can, right? So there is no environment where a human doctor will be be able to outperform a doctor using artificial intelligence. That world just, I don't think that world exists any longer. You know, I think it's just a matter of momentum now before that comes in. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's information asymmetry. The reason you go to a lawyer to get legal advice is he knows more about law than you. The reason you go to a financial planner to ask investment advice is he knows more about the markets than you. The reason you go to a doctor, he knows more about healthcare than you. But what happens when AI knows more about medicine than the collective wisdom of all the doctors in the world, right? You know, I mean, that's essentially where we're moving to. So I say there's two types of people in the world today. Those that use artificial intelligence to enhance their career or enhance their business. And the second type of person, those are going to be replaced by the first type. Education, I think, is going to become a lot more integrated in the world around us using artificial intelligence for that. For example, you'll have earbuds that can instantly translate any language. You'll have smart glasses. You can read a foreign sign and it will turn it into your native language. So you won't have the need to learn languages in the future, but people will still learn languages for the pursuit of knowledge, for awakening their brain in these various ways, right? That's the function of classrooms today, right? You know, they're set up as that they are feeder systems into the industrial age production system. You know, like you have you do your English class, then you move down the production line to maths, and you do science. Oh, and only talk when you're spoken to. Please raise your hand. Be submissive as a factory drone. You know, that's how, you know, public education was designed in those early days, to give people the skills to enter the workforce but be compliant, you know. So, you know, we do need a new system of education. Classroom-based education is sort of done, I think. Yeah. No, I mean, we're not fundamentally changing as humans, so we'll still need social interaction. We'll still need friendships and love and all of those sort of things. AI doesn't change those fundamental things. In fact, AI may give us the freedom to be more human. And so, you know, if you, again, I come back to Shapiro's meaning economy. There's only 4 jobs in the future, according to him. You know, which is you know, there are statutory roles. So this is you know, sort of the legal frameworks, policing, you know, those sorts of things, policy setting. There is human adaptation. So, you know, really the mental health industry and things like that for people who have been disrupted, the people that find this shift, you know, too much for them, to, you know, that are too affected by the fact that their political system or their economic system is being undermined by this, or the fact that, you know, that their perception of the world is changing. So that's going to be a big thing. Climate mitigation and resilience is going to be a massive area. It's probably going to be the biggest single industry on the planet in the 2040s and 2050s. And then you get left, you know, with the true meaning and human passion stuff, you know. And so, you know, these, you know, if you sort of break this down, it's a sort of simpler view of the human experience, because a lot of the stuff that is really complex today and it takes so much time and planning is just sort of looked after by, you know, this huge layer of you know, autonomous technologies. This is where it gets interesting, Simon, is if you continue that thought process. I'm going to teach you how to think like a futurist now, right? So if you think like a futurist and you extrapolate that trend that you're talking about, right? Whereas where you as an individual, it becomes less and less important over time how much money you earn, because more of the system is able to cater for your needs on an autonomous basis. Yeah. That cities run massively more efficiently from an energy and resource utilization perspective because of the injection of automation and autonomous technology. You don't have car accidents, therefore you don't have fatalities. You know, you're much more efficient at medicine. You know, we can reduce the cost of national healthcare by 60, 70, 80% because of automation, but give a much higher quality of healthcare. You extrapolate all of that and you come to the ultimate decision that money is going to be fairly useless in a highly automated society. But the people who decide what the society looks like is the people who own the AI assets right now. You know, people like, look what's happening in the States right now with the big $500 million incentive given to OpenAI and the AI companies and things like that. You know, wealth concentration in the technologies is a problem at the same time as technologies will give us all of these new freedoms.